Welcome to the Fleettalk ROCKcast, our public safety podcast powered by Rock Communications. This is where the people who build, maintain, and depend on mission-critical communications come together to talk real-world operations, lessons learned, and the technology that keeps first responders connected when it matters most. We cover the stories, the systems, and the hard lessons learned behind the scenes, so when it counts, our radios just work. This is the Fleettalk ROCKcast.
Hey everybody, Matthew Littleton with the ROCKcast, the Fleettalk by Rock podcast that we do periodically, and I'm joined again by my friend Matt Hall, my colleague and co-worker, and we're going to talk today about our subject today is In the Beginning There Was Only One. And when we were getting ready for this video, we were kind of talking about reminiscing on some old things, but we want to talk about when you're in an agency and you're accustomed to a single channel and you're starting to look toward a multi-channel system, what it's like. And we wanted to share some of our experiences. And, Matt, you come up in York County, specifically Rock Hill PD, and you remember back in the days, because I think y'all were VHF high band for a lot of years.
Correct, yes. From when I started in 1990 up until we moved to the county's new trunk system in 2007, I believe. We've been VHF high band.
And the county fire system in York County was VHF low band, 3910, right?
Started out low band simplex, and then they upgraded and had a low band repeater.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yes.
I bet there were some days you could talk all across the southeast and others you couldn't talk across the street.
That is true, and it was not uncommon sometimes. You'd listen to California Highway Patrol sometimes when the conditions were right.
Well, both of us have friends from Highway Patrol, and they all tell stories of the days when they couldn't talk to their troop dispatch here in South Carolina, but could talk to California and relay, and vice versa. Sometimes the troopers in California, it is just weird how RF works.
Yes, and everybody that's young enough to not remember those times, they grew up only having, multiple channel trunk systems.
Yeah,
they don't know what they missed.
Well, and I think probably both of us remember the time when you really only had one channel for almost all of your operations, and we didn't share anything with anybody. I don't know how things were in York County, but the area I were, people were apprehensive to share radio channels.
Yes, if I remember, we shared the main dispatches, but it's kind of like the simplex talk radios, secret squirrel stuff.
Right.
Didn't want to share that one. So, but yeah, single channel was.
Yep.
It's a different world.
It is. And, I go back to, I think about, here in South Carolina Highway Patrol, before they converted over to 800, if I remember, it was 6 or 7 dispatch channels for the entire state. And in North Carolina, they had what we call the old taxi cab split. What repeaters, but they talked into dispatch on one frequency and listened on another. And it just little things. You look back at it and you go, wow. All those years we did with so little, and we made it work. And I remember the early days of my fire service career, the only person on the truck that had a walkie-talkie was the engine officer, the company officer. And
right.
I remember being told if there's something that needs to be said on the radio, the captain will say it for you.
That's right.
So
yeah, the days of going into a structure fire with a radio, were not heard of.
No, we're not. So I think today, we kind of want to give our viewers some insight. If you're making the transition into a multi-site, multi-channel system, a trunk system, we understand the pain. We understand what you've had to do, what you've had to go through to get there. And because we've been there. And so let's talk about in the beginning, as we made that transition into a shared system, if you will, or a multi-channel system. So when you think back on that transition, what were some of your experiences? What were some of the things that you wish you would have done early on that we share with our customers now?
Well, it's definitely something that takes some thought process. And having, listened to scanners over the years, listening to Charlotte Mecklenburg, they were on a trunk system, but it was an analog trunk system. I had a little bit of an idea of how the bigger agencies operated and how they used tag channels, ops channels, and all this, and assign operations to certain talk groups and stuff, which was unheard of where I came from. I mean, at the police department, you were dispatched on this channel, conventional. You got there was running canines, you were on that channel. If there was something else going on over here, everybody's on the same channel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was very confusing at times. But getting everybody under the mindset of, you really have to think how you want this to work, because you can set up, the talk group layout, however, to fit your operational needs. And everybody operates a little different. And a lot of the agencies that we've worked with, came from single channel, dispatch, and then maybe a simplex or something. So we try to give them as much information as possible as to, what are the capabilities, but you still at the end of the day have to make those capabilities work for the way that you operate.
And I think that's a good point, because, so we joke about it a lot of, in public safety, there's only two things public servants hate, and that's changing the way things are.
Right.
Exactly. But I think it's a human thing. We're comfortable where we are. And to move to a different spot, sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's intimidating. And I think something we do, I feel like we do, when we bring on a full customer, we sit down and we try to help them build in what they think that needs to look like.
Right.
But we build in one mass reprogramming that in time, you're not going to get it right the first time.
You will never get it right the first time.
No.
There's just too much changing from old to new to get it on the first shot.
And the capabilities that are there that you may or may not know about. You're talking about, being a chase, a track, or whatever. Everything stays on that one channel.
Right.
And what I think a lot of people don't realize, and maybe even our non-public safety listeners, is you have a mass incident go on. Well, you still got the everyday things that are going on.
That's correct.
You got, no matter where you are, you got the cardiac arrest, the house fires, the traffic stops, the wrecks, all of those things, they don't stop just because you got a big incident going on.
That's exactly right.
And so I think being able to think through that and go, all right, let's get us some ops or some tacs or incidents, whatever you want to call them, some alternates there that we can move. And one of the things that I saw early on in Pickens County, where I'm from, if they got into a chase, well, whoever was primary on that incident, they would, a dispatch would come on the radio and all units not involved with the 10-0, signal 11, channel 6 or whatever it was. They'd telling them to move. Everybody that's not involved in this, shut up and get off the channel.
Right.
And, so we saw that a lot, but even then there was limitations in coverage. There was whatever the case may be. And so I think that's pretty cool. I think for me, one of the things I would recommend to our viewers is take a minute and sit down and look at operating procedures. What are your operating procedures today? How do you do business? It doesn't matter whether you fire, EMS, police. It doesn't matter. Look at it today and start thinking, all right, what can I do to better achieve the goals of my standard operating procedures today? And y'all had a lot. Rock Hill PD was pretty infamous of being, I think y'all were one of the early CALEA accredited agencies.
Yes, we were quite a few years.
So you were really good at, you guys were really good at having the operating procedures down. And
right.
How did you view that?
As far as the operating procedures?
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We changed quite a bit because, again, coming from one talk path, talk group, channel, whatever you want to call it, to multiple, opened up the doors for so many things,
right?
Narcotics, all this, but it also opens up the doors for a lot of potential, I don't want to say problems, but issues,
right?
Like you said, you're going to have to look at some of your procedures. How do those change? Policies change. And I was also over dispatch, so I was also seeing things from the dispatch side, which is a whole different animal. Because
that's correct.
Yeah, we now have 15 talk groups, but
you only got 3 people.
You only have so many dispatchers. So we actually had designated groups that dispatch would monitor, and if there was an operation or something going on, they would not monitor that. We had them in the consoles, but it was standard operating procedure, and this is the kind of stuff that would change. Dispatch has it, but they're not going to monitor it.
Yeah,
because they can't. They're worried about dispatching primary calls for service and that sort of thing. They have the ability, if they needed to switch over and contact a supervisor on that incident or whatever they were doing, they could, but it was not their normal procedure to monitor that. So there's a lot of procedures that change where you don't necessarily need a dispatcher to monitor what they're doing out there. If they hit their emergency, they would be alerted that way if there's a problem. So
I think you hit on something good there. A lot of times, and it really doesn't matter the discipline, our agencies grow. We add firefighters, police officers, paramedic, whatever it is, we add that staffing, but so often we don't see that staffing increase in the 911 center, in those dispatch organizations. And the human mind can only consume so much information.
That's right.
At a given time. I think that I think sometimes we expect more than we should out of dispatch. And I think probably dispatch expects more out of those in the field than they should. I think there has to be a conversation that has to be had. And one of the things I enjoyed doing early on was as we started growing and changing, I enjoyed having those conversations with our dispatch centers and hearing from them. I remember asking, can you, at the time we were dispatched from our respective our PSAP, and we asked the county's PSAP, could you take us on? And she had to tell me, no, I don't think I can. And she wasn't being territorial. She was just stating the facts. I don't think I have enough manpower to give you the attention I need without robbing somebody else of that attention.
Right.
And I think that was a fair assumption.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's, when it's quiet, there's nothing going on. But when it's busy, it's, all hands on deck. And one of the things I started when I took over dispatch at the police department is I had my shift supervisor from dispatch sit in the roll call. So we could start to build that relationship.
That's pretty cool.
We wanted them to build that relationship. So if there was any concerns, that I'd have them, bring in the reports from the previous shift. There was anything from the dispatch side that needed to be passed on in roll call, the dispatch supervisor, and then they get that more face-to-face.
That's pretty cool.
Start to build that relationship. We had officers on light duty, so I'd have it worked out where if they were officers on light duty, they still working, they could supplement dispatch, and they'd get firsthand sight and experience of what it's like when the phone's ringing. Obviously, we didn't train them as dispatchers, but
they got to see it first.
They got to see it, and they would help if they needed somebody extra to do certain things. They could do it, but we had a lot of guys that came off light duty after doing that with a whole different respect.
People have
knowing what goes on instead of being in the car, being in there, answering the telephones and this and that.
If you've never been a dispatcher, you've never supervised a dispatch center, people have no idea what actually goes on this place. The amount of information, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember, when cell phones started becoming more prevalent, if there was a wreck on the side of the road, you might get 1 or 2 calls from it before cell phones come along. And I think it was 15 to 20. It was 15 to 20 calls for that one wreck, depending on what road it was on.
Right.
And then with the advent of text to 911, at the time it was still new when I was doing it. It was 50 to 100 for that same wreck because people would text much easier. So
it's a lot.
It is a lot. And what people don't realize is if you're getting 10 to 20 calls for one wreck and there's only 3 or 4 dispatchers in there, something's got to wait.
Exactly.
The math don't math. But those calls have to get answered. So I think it's pretty cool. So thinking about we've made the transition into a multi-channel system. What was next? I mean, you looked at your own agency first, and then did you start looking at shared resources or sharing channels or?
Yeah, so here in York County, when we did that, I was part of, they had a big committee put together that discussed, the original fleet map discussions, how it was going to operate, dispatch centers, and that sort of thing. And that was very beneficial, but with any other kind of government committee, it also slowed things down a little bit sometimes because it just did. No, definitely. And our standard going into it was with other law enforcement agencies, we came to the agreement that we're going to share everything.
Yep.
And if there was a reason not to share it, we wouldn't share it.
Yep.
Versus we're not going to share anything unless we want to share just the one. So there was no reason not to share our dispatch talk groups, our conference talk groups, our metro talk groups that we use for incidents, that sort of thing. Internal affairs, obviously, they didn't share that. That was like 5 or 6 radios in the entire department. We didn't even share that internally for obvious reasons. Command staff talk groups, there was limited access, but 99% of them were shared with other law enforcement agencies. Now, obviously, we also shared some with EMS and fire, but those were on a scaled back there, but we pretty much followed the same suit as the sheriff's office and we shared the same across the board with all the.
I think, most of the agencies I've ever worked for, we were pretty good about sharing. And we didn't share narcotics, CID, SWAT, things like that.
Correct.
And then in a lot of cases, so each agency would have their own narcotics, but I know one of our customers that we just brought on, their individual agency narcotics channels are exclusive to them, but they wanted to create a multi-narc encrypted. And so if they're working together, they've got somewhere they can go. So that worked out pretty good. There's a lot of capabilities. And the one thing that I would say to any of you watching, if you're making this transition, regardless of the system type, and you have questions, reach out to us. We would love to help you and work through some of the things and show you some things that we wish we would have done differently, and as well as the successes that we got. There's a plethora of experience and information here in the company. So fleettalkbyrock.com. If you have a specific question, sales@fleettalkbyrock.com. We'd love to talk with you. Thanks for watching.